Hello and welcome to Serial Horror with Favi, a channel for the horror enthusiasts. Today's episode of Serial Killer Sunday is about the death house landlady who murdered 9 to 15 elderly and mentally disabled people by poisoning them and suffocating them and then burying them in her own backyard. Are you ready? Let's do it. Dorothea Puente, which we all know her by today, born Dorothea Helen Gray, ran a boarding house in Sacramento, California in the early 1980s. Puente had a traumatic upbringing with both of her parents being severe alcoholics. She lost both her parents at the really young age of 9. Her father died of tuberculosis and her mother died in a motorcycle accident shortly thereafter. Her and her siblings were sent to an orphanage where she was sexually abused. Then Gray was committing crimes since the age of 19. She spent time in jail for forgery and owning and operating a brothel. She spent a brief time at a mental state hospital where she was diagnosed as a pathological liar with an unstable personality. Well, go figure. Puente was married quite a few times during her lifetime, I gotta say. She even assumed the identity of Sharon Johansson after one of her husbands, Axel Johansson. After their divorce, she did this to basically hide her delinquent behavior. She portrayed herself as a kind Christian woman. She then married a man by the name of Roberto Jose Puente. The marriage was short-lived and the two separated only after 16 months and eventually divorced. However, Puente continued to use the name for more than 20 years. Puente then focused on running the boarding house located at 21st Street and F Street in Sacramento. She was established in the community as a genuine resource to assist alcoholics, homeless, and mentally ill people. She really made an effort to change her image by wearing vintage clothing, big granny glasses, and letting her hair turn gray. She then met a man by the name of Pedro Montalvo, and the two married. But a week into their marriage, Montalvo got the hell out of there. Smart man, right? The murders began in 1982. One of her first victims was a woman by the name of Ruth Monroe, a 53-year-old who lived in her upstairs apartment. Ruth suspiciously died of an overdose of codeine and acetaminophen. Police ruled it a suicide. Although she wasn't a suspect at this time, she did serve 3 out of a 5-year sentence for theft charges on another tenant who had accused her of drugging and stealing from him. During her time in prison, she developed this relationship with a man, a pen pal relationship, and they became close. And when she was being released from prison, he actually picked her up when she was released in his little red pickup truck. While the two ended up moving together, he moved in with her. Later that year, Puente hired a handyman to install some wood paneling in her house. But instead of paying him for his work and labor, she gifted the man a red Ford pickup truck. She claimed to the man that her boyfriend in Los Angeles had no use for it anymore. Then she asked this same handyman to make her a 6x3x2 box. She said she needed it to store books and other items to take to storage. Oh, and by the way, she also asked him to help her transport it to a storage depot. So along the way, she tells him to stop on the highway and tells him to dump the box along the riverbank because it contained junk. Now, surprisingly enough, what do they find in the box? Yeah, a body. But the body was too decomposed and unidentifiable. All the while, she continued to collect the boyfriend's pension and took in 40 new tenants. She collected their monthly mail before they saw it and paid them with stipends, and then pocketed the rest. A neighbor got suspicious when a handyman known as Chief was hired by Puente to dig in the basement and kind of haul away soil and rubbish away. She then has him install fresh concrete in the backyard garage. It isn't too long after, yeah, you guessed it, Chief disappears. In November 1988, police were called to her property from a social worker inquiring about the disappearance of one of her tenants, Alvaro Montoya. After noticing disturbed soil on the property, the police then uncovered the body of tenant Leona Carpenter. 7 bodies followed that were eventually found buried on the property. Puente was charged with a total of 9 murders, including her boyfriend and 8 tenants that lived in the boarding house. Those 7 victims were found suffocated to death, supposedly with a pillow. One of the victims found buried in her yard was mutilated to conceal her identity. Her head and hands and lower legs were gone, and they were never found. During the second day of the search and excavation, Puente vanished. Yep, just up and left while they were actually digging in her backyard. I mean, she wasn't really arrested yet. She wasn't detained. They were just discovering all this in her backyard. She asked one of the investigators if she can meet, I believe it was her nephew, down at a coffee shop right down the street, not even a mile away from the property. They actually let her go. She went and never returned. They noticed that she was gone for, I think she said she was only going for 20 minutes, and she was gone for an hour. They went out to search for her at the cafe, and she was nowhere to be found. A nationwide manhunt then took place and led them to a hotel in Los Angeles, where she checked in under the alias Dorothea Johnson. She actually hid in her room for days without leaving her room. One day she got bored and left to go to a bar, where she introduced herself to an older man. The man recognized her, and well, to her own demise, he called the police and they showed up and she was caught. Puente's trial began in October of 1992 and lasted a whole year. The prosecution claimed that Puente purposely gave them an overdose of drugs, wrapped their bodies in sheets, and buried them in the garden, while she continued to collect all their checks, Social Security, pensions, unemployment. After a month of deliberation, the jury found her guilty of only 3 of the 9 murders. She was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, then died in prison in March 2011 of natural causes. Wow, unlike her victims, she lived a pretty much decent life. On this channel, I like to cover the homes, if it's the case where the murders actually took place, and give an update. The home of Puente is located at 1426 F Street in Sacramento, California. After her imprisonment, the house lay empty until it was sold at a public auction. The same year she died, in 2011, was when it was sold. The property was bought by a couple, Tom Williams and Barbara Holmes, for $215,000. The couple were very aware of the history. When the murders happened, the home was a light blue in color and has since been repainted to a tan color. It seems like a fresh coat of paint and fake grass on the yard seem to be the only things that have changed. Well, no, not really. The house is now featured in many ghost shows and crime tours in Sacramento, and most recently in the Netflix special. Now, I do want to add, the owners actually live there. They're a pleasant, cute little couple. I will pin their short documentary in the description below if you're interested in watching it. The house was built in 1890, so it's viewed as a historical building and will never be demolished. My question is, would you ever buy a murder or death house? Let me know in the comments below. And this concludes this episode of Serial Killer Sunday. Don't forget to subscribe so you can join me for new videos every week. Toodles!